Welcome to Pioneer Portraits. I am your host, Darla Miller. Join me as we dig into the university experience of Malone students and alumni and hear more about what challenges, encourages, and inspires them. Welcome, you guys. Today we are going to take the 30,000-foot view of Malone's historical highlights. And you guys, I cannot think of anyone better to do this with. We have our resident historian who literally wrote the book and will be reading sections of that book to us on Malone's history, Jacci Stuckey. And Jacci, you grew up here, and Malone is part of who you are. And that's one of the things that I love about you. To have a history also, and part of who you are, literally by bloodline, we have our youth pastor, youth ministry teacher, practical ministry teacher, including youth. Most importantly, Dave is just a foundational part of our theology and Bible program and is a descendant of the Malones, which makes him just a well-rounded, extra special addition to our group. So thank you so much for being here with us, both of you. I'm going to start with you, Jacci. Do you mind painting a picture for us of March 17th, 1892? And you have an introduction in your book, which I think would be a good start with that.
I'd be happy to. Just a little bit of background. I wanted to have a sense of what that day was like. And so I went to the Cleveland Public Library and asked for some information about that. So let me begin. The weather on March 17, 1892 was fair but chilly, typical for mid-March in Cleveland, Ohio. It was St. Patrick's Day, and Clevelanders were observing the Irish holiday in a variety of ways. Scheduled events included a lecture on Ireland's schools and scholars, a special concert and theater production at a local church, and a banquet sponsored by the Philo-Celtic Club. Others patronized local shops and markets. Crow and Whitmarsh was selling men's socks at 25 cents for 3 pairs, and Copco soap for 4 cents a cake. Fuldheim's was holding a closeout fire sale featuring $85,000 worth of the finest shoes and boots. Baseball enthusiasts were at League Park to watch the hometown professional team, the Cleveland Spiders, play the first game of the year. The plain dealer predicted that the 1892 season would be the Spiders' best ever, and it was. The game set the team on a course to its winningest season during its brief history, thanks to the talents of the Spiders' soon-to-be famous pitcher, Denton True Cy Young.
Wonderful. So why is that important to Malone?
Well, I wanted to paint a picture of what the day was like. In some ways, not terribly significant, although I thought St. Patrick's Day was significant because Malone is an Irish name, so yes. Walter was descended from Irish folks. And I wanted to imagine what it would be like for students entering the school on the first day. This was a huge undertaking by the Malones. They did not initially plan to teach. They were just very concerned about what was going on in Cleveland, and in their Sunday school class, they had a number of young people who wanted to go into ministry, but not necessarily go to a 4-year college. So I just wanted to paint a picture of what that day looked like.
And that's wonderful. So the importance is that is literally the first day.
That is literally the first day of classes.
Tell us what was going on with that class. How many students were there?
I love this. There's so many stories I love. So Walter and Emma had felt compelled to go into some kind of post-secondary education, although I want to also be reminded that many of these students didn't have high school degrees, and that doesn't happen until later that they require that. But they had this huge Sunday school class, about 500 students, and many of them wanted to do foreign mission work. Some of them wanted to work, domestically. So this wasn't intended to be a 4-year college. In fact, Walter was asked to become the first president of a Quaker school in Chicago. He turned it down. He and Emma prayed about what to do, and they decided to open their own 1-year training school. They prayed that only 6 students would show up because, again, this was a huge undertaking.
For sure.
They already had their own business. They had several children by this time. And exactly 6 students showed up in the rented house that they use for the school.
That is a beautiful story of God's provision.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Dave, I've heard you tell a little bit about what it was like for people to come in and be students. And I would love for you to share some of that story. But I also want to ask, what's some folklore? You must have family stories that maybe didn't make it into the book that would be wonderful to share.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so thankful for the work that Jacci's done. I mean,
Absolutely.
She is a fantastic scholar and historian, and I often joke she knows more about me than I do. But really, I mean, fantastic work. There's so much of that I didn't know. And so then in terms of the kind of the family side of things, of course, I was not there in 1892.
You were not.
Believe it or not. But my mom grew up with Walter and Emma in her home. They actually lived with her when they were older. And so a lot of stories come from Mom. And then also from this great book that Walter started and never finished. It was called Life Stories, and then John Oliver ended up pulling it together, and this has been a gem for our family to have. So it's his autobiography. So one of the things that Mom talks about was how much fun they were. So, sometimes you might think about, you see pictures of people at that time period. They sometimes look fairly, stiff. That's just kind of how it was. But they were fun people, and especially Walter. He was kind of the life of the party sometimes, from what I've been told. But they would, at Christmas time, he would dress up like Santa Claus, and he would do that whole gig. And then sometimes, and this is late 19th century, they would go out in the sleigh in the snow and have snowball fights.
Oh, fun.
And so, I mean, they were a fun group. But I think, too, the other thing about the beginning of the school that really strikes me, and I can relate to this, is, Walter had really a reluctant call to the Friends meeting there in Cleveland. He was part of the business. It was doing very well. I mean, very well. He loved Jesus, but like some of the rest of us, was a bit unsure about this call to more of a kind of a full-time, commitment. And so you have that, and then on Emma's side, really kind of a reluctant call to Jesus as Savior and Lord. She came out of a different Friends background that wasn't Orthodox or Christ-centered, at least on her dad's side. And so she came to Christ at a Moody crusade, and that was quite a process for her. So the backstory is that, along with the invitation to go to Chicago, which was a real live option at one time, the backstory is that in some ways this was an unlikely, opening of a school. In many ways, actually, they didn't have the credentials really in terms of academic credentials. So it was very much a God-ordained story that brought Emma and Walter together in Cleveland, the same time, same place, and then this love for students. The one thing that I really think stands out for me with Walter and Emma is how they wanted more than anything to hear and follow the voice of Jesus, whatever that meant. So it wasn't about creating some big enterprise. It was about being obedient to Christ and loving those students that they felt called to serve. And so Walter often would talk about the word of the king. That's from Ecclesiastes 8:4. And so when they had to finally make a decision about opening this school, Walter and Emma both wrestled in prayer over it, and they came together and said clearly, this is what we're supposed to do. So we have the word of the king on it. So that for somebody who's part of their family, that's a tremendous gift that they've given to us as a family, is that desire to put Christ first and to follow the voice of the Good Shepherd.
What a legacy. I mean, it just is, it's an amazing thing for you and your family, but as you're hearing, I'm thinking this is what we've been doing at Malone forever. We've been following their calling and continuing to put Christ first and care for our students. That touched me. So wonderful. All right, I'm going to quote the book because I do have one quote. In the 1922 and 23 annual catalog recounted the original intent of the Malones. It has now been 30 years since the word of the Lord came to J. Walter and Emma B. Malone, two young ministers of the Friends Church, calling upon them to open a school for the study of the English Bible and the training of young people who felt a call to service in the vineyard of the Lord. It was to be a school of coeducation in a double sense. Coeducation in the sense of being for both young men and young women, for they believed in women's ministry, and coeducational in the sense of combining Bible study and practical soul-winning work. As a result, a strong body of Christian workers has gone from the institution in all parts of the homeland and to many foreign fields. The gospel has been preached by them in clearness and power, and hundreds have been, through their labors, brought to Christ. So I have two parts of this is it's just an exciting read.
It's just lovely.
It's just lovely, it is. Dave, I have heard you talk to students about imagining those first days.
Yeah.
And will you talk to us a little bit about what was expected from these students academically and internship, I guess is what we would say now, but certainly in institutional work?
Yeah, so a little different curriculum than we have today, although there's some definite connections, some similarities. I often tell students, so imagine showing up for school your first day and your schedule says Old Testament and New Testament in the morning, and in the afternoon you get to pick from visiting or serving at the brothel, the opium den, or the saloon. And that's what it was. I mean, it's really that's what the curriculum was. Mm-hmm. It was studying the Bible in the morning, and then going out and putting into practice some of the ministry tools and callings that they've been given. And that at that time, according to Walter and others, downtown Cleveland, urban Cleveland, was a pretty rough place. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it was called what was it, the Devil's Square or the Devil's something there in downtown Cleveland. And so that's why they started the school. It wasn't to be a diploma mill. I mean, it was to be a place where they were equipped with practical skills to proclaim the gospel, both, and this is what that quote gets to from Jacci's book, both the personal salvation, the personal life with Christ, as well as the outward social justice piece of expressing the gospel in helping people who are addicted to all kinds of things and poor and hungry. And so that, this is before 1910 with the modernist fundamentalist split. Mm-hmm. So I think if you would have asked Walter and Emma, which is more important, ministering to the soul or the body, they probably would have said, I'm sorry, but I don't understand the question.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so I try to tell our students, I think we need to recover some of that. And I know Jacci feels that way too. But and I'm also really blown away by Emma's influence in that time and that culture. And so she was, they were hand in hand in that work. So,
if I can just add a little something
I'd love for
to
you
that.
to.
So, Jerry Osborne Williams, his mother, joined my Quaker history class, and we were reading the autobiography, and Jerry, she can have a twinkle in her eye, and she was talking about growing up in the home, and she said, talked about their personalities. So the administrator was primarily Emma. Yeah. And then the person who would put on the Santa Claus suit and would just have this gentle heart as well, that was Walter. And I always thought it was interesting, and we talked about that with her, is that Emma taught Old Testament, and Walter taught New Testament, and it seemed to
suit their personalities.
Suit their personalities, which I thought was just really lovely.
Jacci, can you speak to women in a Bible school at this time?
Right. Well, Bible institutes were fairly new, yes.
Right.
And they become Bible colleges, and they originally called it a school, not an institute. Malone was or Cleveland Bible Institute That's not what its name was. It's so long, I'm not even going to try and say what it is. But this was something new. They were intentionally located in urban areas. Cleveland at the time was the 10th largest city in the nation, the fastest growing in the city in the nation. So during industrialization, there was a lot of social and economic dislocation. And so being the 7th, it was still fairly new, but from the beginning, and this is in part their Quaker or Friends heritage, because women were recorded as ministers from the beginning, but it's also part of their partnership. From the beginning, they were partners. They taught the Sunday school class together. And Emma was probably the very first woman to lead a co-educational institution, 4-year or otherwise. And she was a leader so that other Bible institutes that were founded, including what is now Azusa Pacific College, was founded by someone who had been at Cleveland and was influenced by Emma's work. And it was clear in everything that I read, they were equal partners. In fact, they were co-pastors at Cleveland First Friends Meeting, later church, now Willoughby Hills Friends Meeting. They were co-evangelists. They traveled around the country. So they just didn't share the gospel at the institution. They went across the United States. I mean, how many women did you hear, or partner, men and women, that treated each other as equal partners in sharing the gospel of Christ?
That's pretty wonderful.
Oh, yes. I'm just amazed by them.
Yeah, me too. In all of our name changes and location changes and leadership changes, tell me how you think Malone has stayed true to its mission.
Well, any institution goes through its ups and downs.
For sure.
And Malone is no different. But it has always been dedicated and committed to our motto, which is serving Christ's kingdom first. That's always been first and foremost. I do appreciate the ways that our president has reaffirmed our commitment to our tradition. And yes, the Friends tradition is important, but I would argue the commitment to sharing the gospel is first and foremost. And Malone is a mission field. I'm an historian, but this is a ministry. This is part of my mission. And it's so exciting to be a part of this legacy that Walter and Emma started.
And while we are so appreciative of Walter and Emma, there are other presidents who by their example, led in faith. And I think the story of our location here is such a beautiful story. So we even have the miracle on 25th Street. We even have our own title of it. Could you talk about that,
Yes.
please?
I'm going to need to look in the book just to make sure I don't get the facts wrong. So
It's okay because Malone's would tell stories and embellish just a little bit sometimes. It's
I
okay.
try not to, but I do want to say
She is a historian.
I don't like to embarrass Dave, but Dave has such an amazing Christian legacy on both the Williams and on the Malone side, the Osborne side. When I worked on my thesis, I examined the China Mission, and his grandparents on the Williams side were very much a part of that. And I was also privileged to serve with Byron Osborne on the Alumni Executive Board. And when I was in the First Friends Youth Group, we went to their house, and I saw all of his chickens and his trophies. But Byron, he just was special in and of himself, regardless of whether he married into the delightful Malone family or not. He graduated from Malone. It wasn't Malone then, it was Cleveland Bible Institute in 1916. They went to Virginia, I think, for a couple years where he was a pastor.
Born in Virginia.
Yes,
yeah,
I thought so. And then they came back, and he served as vice president for a number of years. In 1951, he becomes president. And then a few years, well, it was about that time, he heard from the Ohio Department of Transportation that they were going to build a freeway right through the Esther Baird Residence Hall. There was no other place for women to stay. The men were at the old campus. That's a story for another day. But there was no place to house the women. They tried to buy property in the area. There was no property available. They tried to buy property in Cuyahoga County. They were very committed to being in an urban setting, but everything fell through. So the trustees actually considered closing the institution. And then a trustee who went to Canton Friends Church, which is a fairly new church at the time, said, there is property in Canton that's going to come open. So the trustees prayed about it and decided, okay, we're going to bid on some property. Now, here's what's interesting. Dover offered either $50,000 or $100,000, it's in here, for us to move to Dover, for this institution to move to Dover. But our ministry was in an urban area, and at the time, Canton was the largest city in the nation without its own college. So on February 1st, 1956, Byron came down to the property of what was then the Canton Infirmary and Farm. I could get so excited about this.
I love this.
And they were going to bid $50,000 on it. And because the Stark County Commissioners and the Canton Mayor all wanted this property, they said $50,000. So they bid $50,000. And thought they were going to get the property. In the meantime, there are students and faculty praying up in Cleveland about this. And I'm going to read from this because I don't want to forget it. So he had $50,000 on hand. When the auction commenced, Dr. Osborne bid the full $50,000 on behalf of Malone College. This was a momentous occasion for the Canton community. Canton at the time was the largest city in the nation without its own college. However, someone else bid $100,000 for the property.
Oh, no.
He had $50,000, and let me tell you, there wasn't much money. Here's something else about the Malones. The first few years, they paid the faculty salaries. They were very wealthy at one point. They didn't die very wealthy because they poured everything into this school. They're with Jesus now. They can't tap into that money. So President Osborne was not the only person in the crowd disappointed that there had been this $100,000 bid. Canton officials were none too pleased themselves. Dr. Osborne was at a loss. Now what? Although their properties in Cleveland had been appraised at $800,000, they didn't have those funds at their disposal. In his 1970 history of the college, Osborne wrote, quote, "That was a moment of tenseness for me. What could be done? How could one pay $100,000 in cash when only $50,000 was available?" There was a moment of silent prayer. I can just imagine him praying. And just before the auctioneer was ready to let the property go to the bidder for $100,000, I said, $101,000. And so the purchase was made by the college. The Board of Trustees did secure the extra funds, although some faculty members and students were deeply troubled. Why had their earnest prayers gone unanswered? Why had the land cost over twice the amount for which the college had budgeted? Fortunately, the story does not end there. 3 years later, Malone College officials received word from the Ohio Highway Department that, yes, another freeway, what is now US 62, would cross the college property near its northern border. After some haggling over the price, the government paid Malone College $86,525 for 7 acres of its land. Thus, in the long run, the campus property had not been purchased for $101,000, but for $14,475. But there is yet another sequel. Since a portion of the school's property was situated north of the new freeway on the south side of 30th Street Northwest, it was orphaned and could not be directly accessed from the campus. Therefore, the board approved a sale of the property and sold the 30th Street parcel for $40,000. In other words, the school came out ahead, $25,525. Dr. Osborne rejoiced, and he wrote in the book, "The Lord, in the words of the apostle, had done exceeding abundantly above all we had asked or thought."
If I were a small child, I would want you to read bedtime stories to me.
Well, you can tell how excited I am about that.
Well, it's such a wonderful story. And it's truth, and it's God's provision over and over and over and over what we can imagine.
I can tell you when Grandpa O told that story, he would have a smile on his face, but sometimes you'd almost see sweat on the brow because that was a pretty tense moment. So,
I believe it. Yeah. I believe it. Can you remember your favorite telling of that story by him? Or was it just told again?
Just kind of one of those stories that you heard, yeah. And he was so incredibly committed to Malone and almost like one of his kids, the school. And I think Walter and Emma probably felt that way too, and others. So yeah, he would just always tell those stories with, a smile on his face and just so thankful for God's provision.
And a little panic in his voice.
And maybe just a little sweat on his brow.
Can you imagine, though, what he was going through then?
No. Well, no.
Nope.
And I don't want to. Tell me the origin of Christ's kingdom first. Why is that such an important part of Malone University's story?
That came about, I think, when we came here, because the previous motto had been out and out for Christ, which was indicative of the missionary work. But it was important in saying who we are as an institution. This is kingdom work.
Correct.
First and foremost, no matter what the discipline is, because we were now a Christian liberal arts college. The name changed in 1956, even though we didn't come here until 1957. And I think that encapsulates who we are as a institution. I will mention your husband when he spoke at a chapel, it must have been 2000, 2001, and he said, we need a verb there. And so he would often say, we always need to seek Christ's kingdom first.
And I would just add, I do think, whether it was an intention or not, it does grab the spirit of the origins where, Walter kept emphasizing the word of the king.
Yep.
He usually called God king. That was a common way that he would refer to God. And so I think the kingdom was very much what they were about. So it seems to fit.
And your grandfather would have known that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at one point, our students had to sign a statement of faith in order to come. But I believe it was your grandfather, or was it Cattell? Was it Everett Cattell who began this thing we call the Malone experiment? Can you explain that?
Yes, it actually began during his grandfather's tenure. Until 1957, students who came to Malone had to profess that they were Christians. But then in 1957, when this became a liberal arts institution, they wanted to expand so that this became a mission for anyone in the area. And we had a lot of students from Canton who came because there was no other college in Canton. The Malone experiment is the term that Everett Cattell used to explain this. The experiment was that we would invite anyone to come here. It didn't matter what their faith stance was. However, if they did come, there were certain requirements, including going to chapel, originally 5 days a week. When I was here, it was 3 days a week. I think it was 2 days a week for you, but it was 5 days a week. And that we would see this as a mission field. We're going to encourage discipleship for those who are already believers, and all faculty and staff have to be believers, administrators, et cetera. But for our students, how can we share the gospel intentionally and also through our witness to those who may not know Christ? And so many students have come to Christ as a result of coming to Malone.
Story after story.
Right.
Someone should write a book about that.
Yeah.
His turn this time.
Well, actually, that'd be fun because some of those folks were students I came to school with here at Malone back in the early '80s, And a lot of athletes, I was on the floor with runners. I hate to run, but for some reason, God has a sense of humor, put me with a bunch of runners. And one of those was Jim Davis, who's a dear friend and been in youth ministry 40 years in the Cleveland area. And he did not know Jesus when he came. He was way outside of the Christian community and came to faith through his time here, through influence of Jack Hazen as a track coach and all kinds of other things, professors and chapel and you name it. So I've taught at a Bible college, and I loved it, and it had a very clear purpose and mission. But I love teaching here in a different way because we have opportunities to influence students outside of the church world or Christian community, and many come to faith. Some don't, but they've been influenced by faith. They hopefully see a genuine experience of Christian faith here. Jim and I served on Upper Penn back in the day as RA and assistant RA, and during that time, we had mostly runners and a lot of them that didn't know Jesus. And so it was fun during that year to see, just through building relationships and trying to encourage them and all the other influences on campus, that several of those guys came to faith during that year. And that doesn't happen everywhere. So I think the experiment has been well worth it, especially if you ask people like Jim and others.
And I know students now that have come to faith this year that have come to faith when they came not even sure they believed in God, and they are now professing and living and involved in reading scripture, and it's just a beautiful thing.
It's awesome. Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. So I'm glad for the foresight to open things up. This has been such a legacy. I want to hear about Aslan sitting here.
Yeah, somebody else said, is that Aslan? Yeah, I think it is a kind of a representation of Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia as the king of the forest, who's this great lion representing Christ. When I was a little kid, and I mean little kid, I would walk into my grandfather's house, Grandpa O, and that would be on the wall coming in. And as a little kid, I would just be like mesmerized, almost overwhelmed. You know, he was almost as big as I was. And so I would ask Grandpa about that, and he would talk about a couple things. He would tell me the story of Daniel in the lion's den, and he always loved to scare me. And if you ever had him tell you a story, he would love it if you got scared. But he would tell those stories, and then my mom would remind me later, after Grandpa died, that this actually came from Walter Malone, and it was passed on to my grandfather. And then when he died in 1990, I received it and have had it since. But one of Walter's favorite images of Christ was the Lion of Judah. And he also loved the book of Revelation. I do as well. But Revelation 5:5, it talks about this vision before the throne room of heaven, and there's no one worthy to take this scroll, which represents the salvation history that God has in store for the world. No one's worthy to open the scroll. And so John says, I wept. And then the angel says, don't weep. It's okay. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed. And so for my great-grandfather Malone in particular, all those challenges that Jacci writes about that they faced, he would keep coming back to this vision, this picture of Jesus as this great lion. And by the way, I think, Darla, you said in this particular picture, you can tell he's strong, but he's also gentle. He's also, you can tell, that kind of lion. As Lewis said in the Chronicles of Narnia, he's good but not safe. He's a real king, so he's very good, but he's powerful. And but if you're on his side, you have no worries. And so that's what it's meant to me, and I think, I hope to pass it on to my kids or grandkids. But again, he's the king. That's a key word that keeps coming through. He's not, yes, he is our friend. Yes, he is many things, but he's also king. And so that means that he is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine through the power of Christ within us. And so I just love having that around.
When you write the revised version of this, you can include that story in there because it does even help us understand better the significance of the motto of the institution.
Yes, Christ's kingdom first. We're still living that. One of the things, and I know both of you do this, and I watch, it's not just the two of you, it's every faculty member I know, and the ladies who work in our cafeteria, and just our staff, this care for students and love for our students and bringing Christ's kingdom to them in a compassionate way. I know of no other institution where kids are regularly at your home and cared for, not in the same way. And that's a beautiful legacy. Speaking of legacy, I want to come back and come full circle to today. We're living in a difficult time culturally. We're living in a difficult time for the church. And I think an institution like Malone is so important and vital to our world. Jackie, you told me things I didn't know, and I love that. What a legacy to the world and a blessing. I'm going to tear up the way that God has used us as an institution. And what an honor and responsibility that we have. So the mission of Malone University, I'm going to read this, and I'll read the whole thing. The mission of Malone University is to provide students with an education based on biblical faith in order to develop men and women in intellectual maturity, wisdom, and Christian faith who are committed to serve the church, community, and the world. I think our faculty and staff embody that mission beautifully. I want to talk about some ways that we're different at Malone and that I'm really honored to serve here in these differences. 3 ways that I think this is demonstrated, and I would love for you guys to jump in. It's demonstrated many, many ways across our campus, but 3 key areas that distinguish us from other faith-based institutions. All employees, full and part-time, Jackie, you said this earlier, are required to sign a statement of faith, of Christian faith, and participate in a local faith community. That's one of our requirements for our employees. All students are required to attend spiritual formation opportunities throughout the semester. And finally, all courses are required to integrate Christian faith in disciplinary, appropriate ways. And I know I've talked to the nursing faculty, and they've said we want people to understand how being a Christian makes you a better nurse. How, to an accounting faculty member who says, I want to look at Bible-based descriptions of how Christians should handle money. This is a unique mission, and it's integral to our calling here at this university and our calling to Northeast Ohio. We are unique. In your opinion, why does that matter at this cultural moment? This is our chance to tell parents why we want their kids here.
Yeah, well, I think it matters because Jesus said that the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. And that was true 2,000 years ago. It's still true today. And, I know that when the school started, and this isn't just about Walter and Emma, it's about all the folks from the church that supported it and the community. But there was a desire that the gospel might go to the ends of the earth. That, Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And so there was this deep passion to take the gospel into places like India and China and downtown Cleveland, and through all kinds of ways. And so it's what we do matters because people matter.
Absolutely.
And people need the Lord. And so it's an incredible privilege to serve in a place where we all want to prepare and equip young men and women to honor Christ wherever they go and take the gospel wherever they go. the days are dark. It's, we're getting closer to the return of the King. And so we want people to be there with us. I want my family, my friends, my neighbors, my coworkers, and complete strangers I haven't met yet. I want them to be there around the throne. At the end of his life, Walter's life, he was dying, and my uncle Lynn Osborne, who is my mother's brother, Byron Lindley Osborne Jr., he remembers that scene when my grandfather Malone died, and he was kind of going in and out of consciousness, but at the end he said he had a vision, and that was not unusual for Walter. But he had a vision of this great throne room, this multitude of people gathered around a throne. In other words, Revelation 7 verse 9. And then he kind of drifted off, and my grandfather Osborne kind of rallied him back, and he said, I see a great many people, and I know many of them. And then he passed. And my Uncle Lynn says, get a little choked up here. My uncle,
Me too.
We need tissues as well as water.
So my Uncle Lynn said that was a reality that haunted him all of his life, and he hoped would haunt all of the Malone's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and down through time, because I want to see him. I want to see him.
Right.
I want to see my mom and dad. I want to see my friends and neighbors who know Jesus. I want to be, most of all, with the King. I want to see Jesus. And so we got work to do. And here's a great place, a great environment to cultivate and encourage and empower, ministers of the gospel, whether they're teachers or business people or healthcare people, going into the marketplace with the good news. So, I get up in the morning excited to come to work because we're doing good stuff. And I'm thankful for people like Jacci who've done it for a while. And I'm coming in late to the game, but it's an honor.
It is. It's an honor to work with both of you guys and to further Christ's kingdom in whatever little ways we can. I appreciate your scholarship and your Christian walk and your love for our students. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing a bit of this history. Thanks again for joining us today for Pioneer Portraits. I hope you will pray for Malone University. Send us students. Come visit our campus and speak well of us. If you like what you hear, share this episode on your social media or tell a friend the old-fashioned way.